Hi, I feel led to share part of my testimony. For me, it started out in 1988. It's the year I was born. I grew up in a very loving household. My parents believed in Christ, but they didn't go to church or really the extent of what I was taught is that Jesus is the Lord, the sacrifice He gave for us, that God is real, and the extent of my relationship, as you'll find out, for many years, was that I would pray before I ate and pray before I went to bed. But even as a little girl, talking even 3 or 4 years old, always had a hunger for God, a knowing that He was real, and I wanted to get to know Him and know more about Him. But a lot of my hindrance was because I was afraid, so I didn't look, and I was really young. We moved to this house that I actually still am living at when I was 7. And my grandmother lived with us for a few years after we moved here. And she began to go to church. And I asked her if she would take me with her. And so she did, thankfully. And I enjoyed it. Unfortunately, some of the kids that were there, I knew one or two, I think, too. I went to school with, and I just started in that school in 2nd grade. They weren't very kind to me, but I still went. Some of the time I wouldn't even go to Sunday school because they were not very kind to me, but I would go, despite that, to the adult church with my grandmother. She didn't know why. I wouldn't tell her why, but I didn't want to go to Sunday school. I didn't go very often, but getting back to when I was even younger, I was very sick. I was born fine, and once I got to age 3, I started catching everything that went around until I got strep throat so bad that my throat was full of what looked like cottage cheese pockets in my throat, and ended up having to have my tonsils removed, and I just wasn't well after that. I ended up having mono at 5 and bronchitis continuously, like month after month. Same thing with the sinus infections, like so frequent. 1 month I'd get it, get better, and then get it another month. We moved to this house, as I said, and things were going okay for a little while. I remember the October we just moved, so like 2 months after we moved here, I was the sickest I had ever been, aside of the tonsils. And I got better, but not for long. That's the way it kept going for many years. I missed a lot of school because of that, and in, say, right before 6th grade, I ended up being in so much pain in my back, and me and my mom would frequently go to Target after school. She'd pick me up and we'd go to Target, and I just told her, Mom, I'm not feeling good. We were redoing my room in the Winnie the Pooh theme, and my mom was getting me things I wanted for it, like a bedspread and just a few things she'd saved up for. And halfway through it, I'm like, Mama, I can't do this. I need to go home. I need to lay down. I was in so much pain. She didn't. She's like, well, let's go check out, and then we can go home. And I said, no, Mom, we gotta leave the basket. I can't do it. And she's like, oh, I know something's going on because you want your room done, and you wouldn't just leave this stuff here. So we went to the car. We had just gotten cell phones at the time. I was almost 13. And we were sitting in the car, and she said, "You sure? You want to sit in the car? I'll go get it." And I said, "No, I want to just go home." She was looking at me funny, and she said, "Look at my eye. Let me see your eyes." And it scared me, so I looked away, and she said, "No, let me see your eyes. I'm serious." So I looked and let her saw my eyes. Let her see my eyes. And she's like, "Okay." The whites of my eyes look like egg yolks. She knew. And so she called my dad and said, "I need you to meet me at the emergency room." So my dad said, "What's going on?" And she told him, and so I went to the emergency room, and I was urinating very dark. It looked like soda. My mama was thinking that I was drinking too much soda, but it actually, at this time, it was because I ended up having hepatitis A. And so I went to the emergency room. They tested me, gave me a urine test, and they sent me home and told my parents to keep me as isolated as possible, to use plastic forks and spoons and cups, and to not eat off of my silverware, and I had to be home. I was very sick for about 8 weeks. That was the first time my mom said she thought that she was going to lose me. Unfortunately, there was many more times after that. But God has been so good through it all. I still didn't know God too well by then. 6th grade came. I'd gotten better from the hepatitis A, thank God. Started 6th grade. A friend of mine invited me to church, and a Christian church. And I asked my parents, and they let me go. It was a youth group. I loved it. Still didn't know God too well, but I knew I had a hunger. I didn't understand it. Still don't completely, but I have this hunger for God and for more of Him. So I went with my friend to church on Wednesdays. Again, kids were not very kind to me as a tween, young kid. I was overweight, very overweight. Little did we know why, because there was days I'd go eating nothing but a salad, or if that, and I'd still have a lot of weight on me. Ended up having a thyroid issue. So, after I would go to church, even though the kids weren't kind to me, my friend was. Thankfully, she would stick up for me sometimes. But I was going for God, and yeah, I went to hang out and all that, but I was going because I had a hunger for God and more of Him. I went a few times, a good handful, and then I started getting sick again. I had issues with my back. My stomach started not doing well. I just wasn't well. I started going to doctors. I'd been to doctors frequently throughout these years because of, like I said, bronchitis and sinus infections. 7th grade came, and I went half of 7th grade to school, and I was homeschooled from then on for 2 years. And then I went into independent high school, but I wasn't able to graduate because I missed so much, even of the independent. But God's plan, is perfect. I started, this was in, I believe 9th grade, getting to where I was, started vomiting a lot. I started getting stomach aches and just not feeling good. And the doctors couldn't find out what was wrong for many years. They thought I was just faking it, wanting attention, didn't want to go to school. And I ended up losing a lot of weight very quickly, 120 pounds in about 9 months. So I ended up, within exactly a year, I went from being very overweight to being put on IV feedings and hydration, fighting for my life from malnutrition, starvation. we still couldn't figure out what was going on. I couldn't do all the tests because some of the tests you had to swallow some barium and keep it down, and I would swallow it and throw most of it up. And sorry, I'm trying to remember everything. So I was put in the hospital, put on the IVs, sent home with them, and unfortunately I'm still on them. I had a PICC line in, many PICC lines, and J-tube that went in my nose down to my stomach. I ended up being sent home with that, throwing up and throwing the tube up out of my, came out of my mouth and out of my nose. It was very painful. They said I went to the emergency room, local emergency room, because I was being seen at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, which is over an hour away. And we were sitting in the emergency room for 3 hours with this tube hanging out my mouth. And we called my doctor from Children's, or excuse me, at this time it was UCLA Children's Hospital. I went to multiple. And they said, you could just go home and pull it out yourself. So my dad said, do you want to do that? And I said, yeah, we won't be seen for at least 2 or 3 more hours here at the local emergency room. So we went home, started pulling, and at the end it felt like there was something hanging on, like something heavy. And I told my dad if we pulled it, it would probably break part of my nose. And he goes, no, they said just pull it out. It should be just one straight tube. And I kept telling him, I was crying, telling him, Dad, I think if we do that. And he goes, what do you want to do? So I said, okay, just pull it. And he pulled it. And my nose started bleeding. There was an anchor about the size of my pinky. The doctor didn't know that that they used one with an anchor. They didn't tell him that. So yeah, he said it was a good thing my nose didn't break. Part of the cartilage looked like it came out, but it didn't break, thank God. Thank God is good. About the time I was 16, 17, I started seeking God again. And I had been still too afraid to read anything other than the Psalms 23 actually. Was the psalm that I read daily. When I was 17, I kneeled and asked God to help me, and I had no friends at the time because all my friends from school, they were being teenagers, and, having a sick friend isn't fun, and most people don't know how to have a sick friend and be a friend to somebody, especially in teen years. And I just couldn't deal with it at the time either. Saying nothing bad about them. I just was trying to deal with staying alive and just day to day. So at the point where I was growing closer to God, I asked, my dad started taking me to a friend's church. And I said a prayer, Lord, bring me some friends. I think I'm ready for friends now. And then a week of me saying that prayer, we went to a new church. Another one of my dad's friends was a pastor, and these girls came up to me and were very kind to me, and I still was uneasy and unsure and very out of the loop. I still am, because isolation. For so long, I only had spoken to a few friends online that I met. That was about it for many years. And they're like, do you have MySpace? And I said, what's MySpace? They're like, are you kidding me? They told me about it. They're like, one of them, one of my dearest friends and sisters, who I actually consider family, her whole family I consider my family and sisters. Her dad, my brother, of course. She's like, give me your phone number. So I did, and she's like, call me and text me, and I was still very unsure. And she's like, seriously, I'm not gonna let you not. So she would text me, and that night I looked up what MySpace was and made a page, and I only met I met her and her sister that day, her other sister, who was my age, she was on a mission trip. So I didn't get to meet her till later on MySpace and then in person. They were so kind. For about a year. They would pick me up, and whenever I'd be up to it, and we went to the beach, especially at night, because one of the things that I had mentioned is I became light sensitive, as you can tell. I wear sunglasses most of the time, unless it's dark enough, and I have to wear gloves most of the time, because my eyes get very sensitive. My eyes can only tolerate so much light, and my hands will actually start bleeding with light, even indoor light. I had it happen even with a cell phone that I, at the time, the flip phones we used to have, I left open, fell asleep, and woke up with a big cut on my finger and blood everywhere. I even had surgery to have one of my central line place, which is a line, I still have one right now. It's where they go in through your chest and put a tube in your artery to go in, goes up your artery into your subclavian, which is the entrance to your heart, so that your heart can pump the IVs through. And I told the nurse to keep my gloves on. They didn't, and one of my hands was on my stomach, and the surgical lights, those are extremely bright, and it's mainly the UV rays, and they didn't know that why, but they saw my finger started forming a cut, and blood started coming out, and the nurse told the doctor, look at this, and they were watching. The surgery was finished, and they kept me asleep watching my finger start bleeding and the cut form. They couldn't believe what was happening, and they told my dad, we worked on her chest, not her hand, but she's got a cut on her hand, and my dad explained why, and because it's a very rare condition, and they couldn't believe it, and they looked it up, and they believed it, but they couldn't believe it was happening in front of their eyes at the time. And a lot of the doctors didn't believe it until they saw it, and it was very painful. It still is, but thank God it's gotten better. I still have to wear gloves and be very cautious about the too much light, but it doesn't bleed as quick. They'll get very, very red, but they don't open as quick, and it can be very painful, and it looks like I get sliced up all over my hands. It used to be within seconds. Now it takes a while, but it still happens, so to be careful. But thank God things are changing. But in 2009, I started getting issues with my lungs. Like I said, I had previously had a lot of bronchitis, and as a kid, it went away for a while. And this is weird. The light sensitivity was very odd for me, because I used to, with my cousin, a friend who I considered my cousin at the time, she would come over during the summer, and we would be out weeks at a time, 8 hours at a time, going swimming, from sunrise to sunset, and again from sunset to sunrise nearly. And so light wasn't an issue until later on. Thankfully, I at least have those memories. And I'll make more. I know I trust God. I got something good to look forward to, even if it's just heaven. And heaven is not a jest. I shouldn't have said that. Heaven is the best thing to look forward to. So in 2009, I started having issues with my lungs. Still not being able to eat and not feeling well. I went to a doctor. Started to wait, but had to wait until 2009 to get an appointment with a lung doctor specialist. Did an x-ray. He saw this, he called a shadow on my lung, and he said, oh, it's probably just your rubber band, because it was only on one side of my lungs. And I said, but my rubber band, I made sure I had no metal on me, because I know the metal will show up on the x-ray. And he said, oh, it's probably your rubber band. And I said, no, it was just elastic. I made sure. And then he goes, oh, well then, maybe it was just your, excuse me, and he said, maybe it was just your breast. And I said, well, if it was my breast, wouldn't I have it on both sides? I have two of them. And he goes, oh yeah, you're right. Then, I don't know, maybe it's just a shadow. So I was like, okay, this isn't, I left that appointment, not going back to him, made another appointment. I waited, still wasn't doing good, made another appointment, took 6 months to get to that appointment. Within those 6 months, I got very, very sick. My lungs were just not good. I couldn't breathe, and ended up in the hospital like a couple days before the appointment came. Thankfully, that doctor was in the hospital, did rounds at the hospital I went to. They did another, I was in the hospital 3 days, and nobody was listening to me. I kept saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. They thought I just had an infection in my tube, which I have had multiple. I had 105.6 fever, and nobody was listening to me. I had 105.6 fever earlier that year, and it was an infection in my lung. This was in the December. They actually thought I was not going to die. The fever wouldn't go away. In December of 2009, that was in April. In December of 2009 was when my lungs were sick. I had 104 fever at the time. And they thought it was the line. The line did have a little infection, but it wasn't what was causing my problem. They took the line out. Lungs, fever stayed. Kept telling the doctors, I can't breathe. They wouldn't listen. A new doctor came on, and my dad said, tell him about your lungs. And I was frustrated. And I said, why? Nobody's listening. And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, I'll tell you, because maybe you'll listen. He goes, what's going on? And I told him I couldn't breathe. I felt this clicking in my lungs. And it was hard to breathe. And it hurt to breathe. So he said, nobody's done a chest x-ray? And I said, no, it's what I've been asking. He said, okay. Within 30 minutes, he says, let me go get a chest x-ray on you ASAP. Stat. So within 20 or 30 minutes, they came in, did a chest x-ray. Came in a little after that and said, we're going to have a lung specialist see you. And I said, why? He goes, you have nodules all over your lungs. And I said, okay. And he goes, and you have a pneumonia. And I said, okay. He said, he goes, you were right. You need to make the doctor. He told me this. If doctors aren't listening, you need to make them listen. So later on that evening, the lung doctor that I didn't want to see came in. And I said, no, I have the other lung doctor is going to see me. And he goes, well, I'm here. And I said, no offense, but I'd rather see the other one. And he said, he kind of was offended, it looked like. He left. The other lung doctor, who actually was the husband of my pediatrician, came in. And he said, I saw your x-ray. And I go, I had an x-ray in April. Did you see it? He goes, yeah. He goes, that was one of the nodules. I go, so back then was a nodule? He goes, yes. I go, so from April to now? He goes, you've grown a lot more. I said, you would have not told me that it was my rubber band or my breast? He laughed and he said, no, why would you ask that? And I said, well, the other doctor said that. And he goes, shook his head. He goes, no, I wouldn't have. I go, you would have treated me. He goes, yes. The other doctor just left me. Well, God's will be done. He's got a good, perfect plan. So they were going to do a bronchoscopy, which is where they take a really small, thin tube, go down your air pipe while you're asleep, and take a look with the camera, and if you have fluid, drain your lungs with it. They scheduled it for the next day. The next day came, I was on the gurney to go down to get the procedure done. The doctor come nearly running, said, well, we could do that, but it's not definitive. It's not definite that we'll have a diagnosis. If we do the surgery, it's called a VATS, you'll have a definite 100% chance that we'll find out by tomorrow, or by the following day, what's wrong. And then he was saying, I had basically a 70% chance of not surviving if I didn't do it. So I said, and he goes, we gotta know now. We gotta schedule it. And Just looked at my dad, and my dad said, Miha, it's up to you. Whatever God will guide. So I just took a second, silently, said, God, what do you want me to do? And I just felt like he would take care of it. So I said, okay, do what we have to do. So instead of going down there, and I said, the only thing is I was kind of looking forward to the bronchoscopy procedure because you could drain it, the fluid, and I could breathe better. And he goes, well, we could do that during the VATS. We'll do that. And I said, okay. The next day came, went down to pre-op. The anesthesiologist came and he said, this is a very dangerous surgery. And nobody had told me that. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, well, you know what they're going to do? And I said, yeah, they're going to take a biopsy. And he goes, yeah, but it's more than that, a lot more than that. You're going to be in ICU, which is an intensive care. And you might end up on a ventilator, a breathing tube. And I said, awake? And he goes, you might. And he goes, your lung may or may not reinflate after this. And I was like, okay. It was 5 minutes before surgery. He goes, so are you sure you're going to do this? I go, I have no other choice. So I signed and I did it. And praise the Lord. They did the surgery. I woke up. My lung reinflated beautifully. I was in ICU. I was okay for the first night. The next night I ended up having another high fever. But I had a tube called an intercostal drain tube out of my lung, and that was so painful. I've had, at this point, 22 surgeries, most of them central line replacements. But that was the worst and most painful surgery ever that I've had. In January 2009, I ended up having my gallbladder removed. A muscle biopsy when I was younger. On my leg, I've had lots of tests, lots of procedures. And did the VATS, and unfortunately they sent it to this specialist at USC, pathologist, and the pathologist still couldn't find out what was wrong. They just said it looked like a bread mold. They just treated me for pneumonia, and I was in the hospital for 3 more weeks. Most of my hospital stays were 2 to 3 weeks each. And I know I'm missing a lot of stuff here and there, but I'm just trying to get to it. And all of this time been on IVs, still on IVs. Well, my lungs have been okay. Once or twice a year, my lungs would act up and I'd be in a lot of pain. But throughout this whole thing, I've had a lot of pain in my stomach and issues with my GI tract. And they thought it was the condition, they still do, that causes the light sensitivity, causing my GI problems, which still don't know, most likely. But my lungs, we found this cream, my mom did, praise the Lord, all glory to God, that my parents knew when my lungs were acting up, because I'd bring the cream out and say, can you rub it on my back, because that's where it would hurt the most. It would be the back. It still does, of my lungs. And starting in August of 2018, my lungs really started acting up again. I was coughing really bad. I ended up coughing up chunks of blood. I didn't want to scare my parents. My brother was just starting classes, and I didn't want to go to the hospital, so I just dealt with it. I was trying to, and from August to January, my back was hurting so bad I thought it was my kidneys, but it later on ended up being my lungs, the lower part of my lungs. My legs, I gained so much fluid in my legs. I had 80 pounds of fluid. I was so swollen. I still have some fluid on me right now, but thankfully it's not as much as before, the edema, but you can still see some of it. But thank God it's not like it was. I couldn't even get on my bed. So from August to January, I was trying to get seen outpatient, going to doctors and getting tests, and I was waiting to get a couple tests done. In the beginning, the insurance terminated me, and thank God, he made them, I was reinstated, thank the Lord, because a few days later I ended up in the hospital. I was fighting God. I really was. I was saying, God, I don't want to go to the hospital. Please just help me get through this. And I kept hearing God say, you need to go. If you don't go, you're going to die. One night, it was on a Wednesday. My dad's early days from work were, well, not early, but earlier days when he got home from work, or on Thursdays for a while. I said, Lord, if I don't do, if I'm not getting any better by tomorrow, I'll go. So that by the time my dad could go to work, come home, and then we could go. God knew in my heart I didn't want to, that I most likely wouldn't have, but I really didn't want to go. I couldn't even get in bed. My legs were so swollen. I need a lot of help. Still do. From my parents. Especially my mom. But my dad has to help a lot too. Even my brother helps me, thank God. I'm so thankful for my family. So thankful for God. Couldn't have done it without God and my family. That night, I got up in the middle of the night, had my tube, and I was flushing it. I was doing my IV, and I didn't flush it right away. It ended up getting a clot. I tried flushing it, and I guess I pushed too much pressure, and my tube burst. Blood everywhere, all over my wall. Not too much, but it was a mess. And I had to go to the hospital. I had no choice. Tube had to be fixed or replaced. And my case had to be replaced. I went, and they tried to fix it, but it wasn't fixable, so they were going to schedule me. But in the meantime, they did a chest x-ray and told them I told them I wasn't feeling well. And they go, you know you're very sick. And I said, yes, I know. The doctor came in, he goes, you have pneumonia, and it's pretty bad. And I said, I know. And he goes, so why didn't you come in for that? And I said, I'm trying to do it outpatient. I didn't want to come in. He goes, it's a good thing you did. They put me in the hospital. Found an IV in me, thankfully, because I'm so hard to find an IV. One time it took more than 10 times just to get a baby IV in me, and I'm not lying or joking. I was put in isolation. They wanted me to do a spit test. All these other tests didn't show up anything. The invasive surgery didn't show up anything. So I'm like, I'm not going to do the spit test. God kept telling me for 2 days, you need to do it. I didn't want to do it. And it was hard to get up. And the nurse said, when you do it, you got to get up. Sorry to be gross, but got to get up phlegm. And it was hard to get up anything. I was coughing, but I couldn't get up anything. Well, sorry, TMI. I